ice cream is probably the best frozen treats that we're gonna have that humankind had ever created. And so with the ice cream season coming up, I'd like to go through how it's made so that we have a good understanding of the food that we eat. And so I'll go through the production process, the storage, and the novel approach that we're gonna see in future ice cream production. When we talk about the production of ice cream, the general process can be outlined by this diagram here. So I will divide this into 3 different stages. The first stage is going to be the blending of the liquid and dry ingredients, and then homogenize it and pasteurize it. After that, you're going to have to cool the mixture down very quickly for a few hours, and you keep it around 2 to 5 degrees Celsius. And this is when the mixture goes through the aging process. You can also add in the flavor and color agents during this time, but what the aging process does is that it allows all the emulsifiers and all the fat and liquid is going to have a chance to interact with each other and to create a more stable product. When it's done, the ice cream base is put into the churning process, which incorporates air into the mixture. This allows the ice cream to be a velvety smooth consistency, and we'll be able to scoop it and not being hard and frozen and really solid. I will talk about the churning process a bit more in depth later on, but for now, we will move on to the next step, which is the adding of the solids. This includes all the cookie dough, all the chocolate chips, and all the brownie bits and fruits and nuts that you want to have in your final product. You don't want to add it towards the very beginning of the churning process because one is that it's liquid versus solid. So what is gonna happen is that it's gonna absorb some of the moisture, and you don't want it to happen. The second point is that most of these solids are gonna be broken apart during the churning process, and you want to keep those intact as much as possible. So that's why it's often added towards the finish of the churning process. Then we move on to the packaging. This will pipe all of the ice cream that is still very soft at this point into the desired containers that's gonna serve to the consumer. And then this go through the final step of the freezing process, which is hardening. This ensures that the ice cream reaches like very cold temperature, like -60 degrees Celsius. And what it does is that it keeps all these delicate and fine air bubbles and fat globules into a very delicate structure network with the ice crystals. So the final step is that we put it into storage and gonna distribute it to the consumer in supermarkets. Now I'm gonna talk a little bit more in depth about the churning process. Churning process is very, very important in ice cream making, and it encompasses 3 key elements. You have overrun, you have temperature, and pressure. What does overrun mean? Overrun means the incorporation of air into your ice cream product when you are churning them. This allows the ice cream to have a more smooth and soft consistency compared to very hard if you just freeze it by itself. Research has also concluded that the higher overrun creates a more warm mouthfeel that is desirable in consumer compared to low overrun. And this makes perfect sense because when you have more air that's whipped into the ice cream, when it ends up into the consumer's mouth, most of the air is just going to evaporate and leaves no cold sensation behind. So it's really up to the producer to decide the percentage of overrun that is put into the ice cream product. Usually this number is around 50 to 100% increase in volume, which is quite a lot. Like, it makes economic sense, but you also have to be considerate of the consumer and consumer satisfaction. Temperature obviously is very important for ice crystal formation and hardening of the ice cream, but pressure is not something that is often talked about in the ice cream production. What it does is that it denatures all the proteins in the cream and milk mixture which increase the viscosity so that the ice cream can be turned into a more stable product that is more resistant to melting. These three elements create a really important network of appropriate ice crystal size and air bubble size, and it ensures that the fat is agglomerated to the air bubble very equally. So it creates a very delicate structure of ice crystals and fat-coated air bubbles. So there are many equipments that has been designed to make this a continuous process that encompass all three elements: overrun, pressure, and temperature. So these are only a few examples that I found from Tetra Pak, but there's also many companies that does the same thing. So moving on to the storage and transport, as you can see from the moment that ice cream leaves the factory, this goes through a lot of fluctuation in temperature until it reaches the consumer in supermarket. Now, you will not see this in commercial ice cream when you get it from the store. You often see this after ice cream has been sitting in your fridge for quite a while. But what it happens is that when the temperature fluctuates, ice cream will tend to melt and refreeze, and when it goes through the cycle so many times, the ice crystal recrystallization occurs. So to understand this more in depth, let's have a look at the animation here. You have a slow freezing process, which is pretty common in supermarket and home freezer. This will create not a lot of nucleation site in the very beginning, because it's not too cold to trigger a lot of them to form. Over time, these nucleation sites will attract ice crystals, and they will grow in size into very large and visible ones that you've seen in the previous picture. And what it does is going to disrupt all this delicate ice crystal and air bubble structure that we tried so hard to create earlier. Compare this to the quick freezing process that you've seen in production plants. You have the very, very, very cold mixture, and when it's whipped up, it creates a lot of nucleation sites. And these nucleation sites, even though they will grow in size eventually, but there's not much room for them to grow because it's only as much water that's being crystallized as there can be in the mixture, right? So this will preserve the integrity of the ice cream, even if the nucleation sites are going to grow over time. With this in mind, what can we do to prevent this from happening? Well, there's always this idea of like you make a better design container or you have a better structure cold chain, but it doesn't address the fundamental problems of recrystallization. Recently, researchers have looked into these antifreeze proteins as a potential ingredient in ice cream. Now, I'm not talking about the antifreeze coolant in your engine. I'm talking about the antifreeze proteins that we often see in cold-tolerant animals and plants. What these antifreeze proteins do is that they will depress the freezing point of water first, but the other important part of these antifreeze protein is that it binds to the ice crystal nucleation site and it inhibits the growth. As you can see from this diagram here, that basically what they do is that they bind to the surface of the ice crystal and they inhibit from growing. Like look at part A, it's just gonna grow, but at part B, they just inhibit it. And so if we do this, we will have to worry about all the recrystallization and growing of the ice crystals because they can only grow to the size that the antifreeze protein allows them to. Now, the media has had a bad experience with antifreeze protein in the past. In 2009, the Italian has had a bad experience with fish proteins in the ice cream, so we need to find a way to incorporate this in a more consumer receptive basis. So this is where my thought of plant proteins come into mind because they're not the only one who's cold tolerant. So I think this will be the new direction that ice cream producer we're gonna take in the near future, and I cannot wait to see how it turns out. This also wraps up my part on the presentation, so thank Thank you very much for watching and have a great summer ahead. Bye!